Commander James Chen stood at the viewport of the transport ship and watched the Valkyrie homeworld grow larger before his eyes. The planet looked like a massive jewel spinning in space with its surface, covered in geometric cities that gleamed under the light of twin suns. He had been to many alien worlds during his career as a diplomatic officer, but something about this one made his stomach tight with unease. The Valkyrie were one of the oldest civilizations in the known galaxy. They had been traveling between stars when humanity was still learning to make fire. Their reputation was clear and cold. They valued logic above all things. Emotions were considered primitive. Their diplomatic meetings were famous for being efficient and completely without warmth. That was why James had been surprised when Earth received the invitation. The Valkyrie wanted to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchange. It seemed too friendly for a species that usually kept others at a distance. But Earth needed allies, and the Valkyrie had technology that could help humanity expand further into space. The transport ship docked at a station that orbited the planet. James straightened his uniform and checked his appearance one last time. His team of 5 other diplomats gathered behind him. They had spent months preparing for this mission. Everyone knew their roles. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. The airlock opened with a hiss. Cool air rushed in, carrying a scent that reminded James of rain on hot stones. He stepped through into a corridor that was all smooth white surfaces and soft blue lighting. A group of Valkyrie waited for them. The aliens stood about 7 feet tall with scales that shifted colors from deep green to bronze, depending on how the light hit them. Their eyes were large and golden with vertical pupils. They wore robes that seemed to be made of liquid metal. Everything about them spoke of age and power and control. But it was the female in the center who caught James' attention immediately. She was smaller than the others, standing perhaps 6.5 feet tall. Her scales were a brighter shade of green with patterns of silver running along her neck and arms. She wore a circlet of dark metal across her forehead, marking her as royalty. "Welcome, Commander Chen," she said in perfect English with barely any accent. Her voice was smooth and somehow warmer than he expected. "I am Princess Shavera, heir to the Valkyrie throne. It is my honor to greet you and your delegation." James bowed as protocol demanded. "The honor is ours, Princess. Earth is grateful for this opportunity." Shavera's eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. She did not look at any of the other humans, only at him. "I have been looking forward to meeting you specifically, Commander. Your reputation precedes you." That was odd. James was a competent diplomat, but he was not famous. There were dozens of officers who could have led this mission. Why would an alien princess on the other side of the galaxy know his name? Before he could ask, the princess gestured toward the corridor. "Please follow me. The welcome ceremony has been prepared." They walked through halls that seemed to go on forever. Everything was spotlessly clean and perfectly arranged. James noticed there were no decorations anywhere. No art on the walls, no plants. Just clean lines and efficient design. It felt more like a machine than a place where people lived. The ceremony took place in a vast chamber, the domed ceiling that showed the stars above. Hundreds of Valkyrie stood in perfect rows, watching as the human delegation entered. James felt like a specimen being examined under a microscope. Shavera led him to the center of the room. She raised one hand, and the crowd fell silent immediately. "We gather to welcome our human visitors," she announced. Her voice carried easily through the space. "They come seeking partnership. We shall determine if they are worthy of such honor." James felt a chill run down his spine. That was not the language of friendly negotiation. It sounded more like a test or a trial. Then Shavera turned to him and smiled. It was not a cold smile. It looked almost genuine. "Commander Chen will be my personal guest during these negotiations. He will stay in the royal wing, where we may have more intimate discussions about the future of our peoples." The other members of James' team looked at each other with confusion. This was not part of the plan. Diplomatic delegations stayed together. Separating the leader from his team was unusual and potentially dangerous. Princess James said carefully, "I appreciate the honor, but my team and I should remain together." It would be more efficient for our discussions. Efficiency is not always the goal, Commander Shavira replied. Her golden eyes locked onto his. Sometimes understanding requires a more personal approach. Your team will be given excellent accommodations. You have nothing to fear. But James did fear. Something was very wrong about this situation. He could feel it in his bones. The other diplomats were escorted away by Valkyrie attendants. They looked back at James with worried expressions, but there was nothing they could do. Refusing the princess' invitation would be a serious insult. Shavira led James through more corridors until they reached a section of the station that was clearly more luxurious. The walls here had color, deep blues and greens. The lighting was warmer. They stopped at a large door that opened silently. Your quarters, Commander, Shavira said. But first I wish to show you something. She walked through the room to another door on the far side. James followed, feeling like he was being led into a trap, but unable to stop himself. The door opened into a smaller chamber. James stopped and stared. The room was filled with objects from Earth, books, photographs, pieces of art, models of human ships. There was even a guitar hanging on one wall. But more than that, there were screens everywhere showing images and data about human history and culture and achievements. I have been studying your species for 5 years, Commander, Shavira said quietly. She stood in the center of the room, looking at him with that same intense gaze. I requested you specifically because of your record. The missions you have led, the choices you have made. You represent something I need to understand. What do you need to understand? James asked. His mouth felt dry. Shavira moved to one of the screens and brought up an image. It showed a species James did not recognize. They looked almost like the Valkyrie, but smaller and with darker scales. These were the Drenkai, she said. 200 years ago, they were the most promising species in this sector. We mentored them, guided them, taught them our ways. They became logical, efficient, and advanced. What happened to them? James asked, though he had a feeling he knew. They went extinct, Shavira said flatly. When disaster struck, they calculated their chances of survival and determined death was inevitable. So they simply stopped trying. They gave up and died. She turned to face him fully. But humanity faced similar disasters. Your world has nearly destroyed itself multiple times. You should have gone extinct a dozen times over. Yet you survive. You thrive. You expand. I need to understand why. James felt his blood run cold as understanding dawned. This is not a diplomatic mission, he said slowly. No, Shavira agreed. This is a test, Commander Chen. I need to determine if humanity deserves to exist or if you are a danger that must be contained. The real negotiation is not about trade. It is about whether your species lives free or dies in quarantine. She stepped closer to him. So let us begin. Show me what makes humans so special. Show me why you refuse to die. James looked into her alien eyes and realized he was not here to negotiate a treaty. He was here to fight for the survival of his entire species, and he was completely alone. Part 2. The test begins. James Chen did not sleep well that first night on the Valkyrie station. He lay in the too large bed in the too quiet room and stared at the ceiling, trying to process what Princess Shavira had told him. His entire species was on trial, and he was the only witness for the defense. The weight of it pressed down on his chest like a physical thing. When morning came, if it could be called morning in a space station that never saw, a real sun, James was escorted to a private dining area. Shavira was already there waiting for him. She sat at a table made of some dark stone that seemed to absorb light. 2 meals were set out. One was clearly human food, though James had no idea how they had prepared it so accurately. The other was something that looked like crystals suspended in clear gel. I hope you've rested well, Commander, Shavira said. She gestured to the seat across from her. Please eat. You will need your strength today. James sat down but did not touch the food. What exactly do you have planned, Princess? I told you. I need to understand humans. The best way to do that is through observation and experience. She picked up a piece of the crystal food and placed it in her mouth. I have prepared several scenarios. Cultural exchanges, as I told the council. But they are also tests. Tests of what? Of whether humanity deserves to continue existing without. Oversight, Shavera said calmly, as if she were discussing the weather. My people believe in logic and order. We have seen countless species destroy themselves through emotion and chaos. We offer guidance to those we deem worthy. Those we deem dangerous are quarantined for the safety of the galaxy. James felt anger rise in his throat, but he pushed it down. Losing his temper would not help. And you get to decide which category we fall into. I am one voice among many, but my voice carries weight. What I report to the council will matter greatly. She sat down her utensil and looked at him directly. I do not wish to see humanity quarantined, Commander. Truly, I do not. But I must be certain. The Drenkai seemed worthy too, and we were wrong. That mistake has haunted my people for 2 centuries. We will not make it again. James picked up a piece of bread from his plate and took a bite. It tasted like ash in his mouth. When did these tests begin? Now, Shavera said. The room suddenly went dark. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in a red glow. An alarm started blaring. Before James could react, the floor beneath them shuddered violently. What is happening? He shouted over the noise. Simulation, Shavera replied. She stood up calmly, as if explosions were not rocking the station. There has been a structural failure in Sector 7. 300 Valkyrie workers are trapped. The support beams are collapsing. You have been given temporary command authority. What do you do? James' mind raced. This was insane. He was not trained for emergency response on an alien station. He did not know the layout or the systems. But Shavera was watching him with those golden eyes, and he realized this was exactly the point. She wanted to see how he would react under impossible circumstances. I need access to station systems, he said. Blueprints. Life support data. Engineering teams. Shavera waved her hand, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. James saw a 3-dimensional map of the station with one section flashing red. Numbers scrolled past showing oxygen levels and structural integrity. All of it was dropping fast. According to the data they had, maybe 10 minutes before the entire sector collapsed completely. The logical move would be to evacuate as many as possible and seal off the section before it took the rest of the station with it. That would save maybe half the people trapped inside. But James looked at that number. 150 lives saved. 150 lives lost? That was the math. Clean, simple, logical, and completely unacceptable to him. We are going to save everyone, he said. Shavera's head tilted slightly. The numbers do not support that outcome, Commander. You have limited time and resources. The logical choice is to maximize survival. Logic says we should accept losses. Humanity says we do not leave people behind. James started issuing commands to the holographic interface. He had no idea if they would actually work in a real emergency, but he had to try. Divert all available power to structural supports in Sector 7. Send every emergency team we have. Establish multiple evacuation routes. That will weaken other sections of the station, Shavera pointed out. You risk causing additional failures. Then we move faster, James shot back. He was working on instinct now, making decisions that his training said were reckless. But something deeper than training was driving him. Something that made him refuse to write off those 150 lives as acceptable losses. The simulation ran for 20 minutes. It was chaos. James made calls that should not have worked. He ordered people to do things that were technically impossible. He gambled with resources they could not afford to lose, and somehow everyone survived, barely by the thinnest margin. But when the simulation ended, all 300 workers were shown as rescued, and the station was still intact. James collapsed back into his chair, breathing hard. Shavera was staring at him with an expression he could not read. You made 17 decisions that were mathematically unsound, she said slowly. You risked catastrophic failure at least 5 times. By any logical standard, you should have failed completely. But I did not fail, James said. His heart was still pounding. Everyone lived, yes, they did, Shavir leaned forward. How? How did you know those impossible choices would work? I did not know. I hoped. The princess sat back as if he had struck her. Hope is not a strategy, Commander. Maybe not for you, James replied. But for humans, it is everything. Hope is what makes us try when logic says to quit. Hope is what kept my species alive when we should have died 1,000 times over. You want to understand why we survive? That is why. We are too stubborn to accept the inevitable. Shavira was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood. Come. There are more tests. Over the next 3 days, James was put through scenario after scenario. Each one was designed to force him into an impossible choice. A plague ship where he had to decide who received limited medicine. A first contact situation with a hostile species where violence seemed like the only option. A moral dilemma where saving one group required sacrificing another. Every time. James made the choice Shavira expected him to make, according to Velkari logic. And every time he made the human choice instead. He distributed the medicine evenly, even though that meant no one got a full dose. He tried communication with the hostile aliens even after they attacked. He refused to sacrifice anyone and found third options that should not have existed. And every time, Shavira looked more troubled. On the 4th day, she took him back to the room filled with human artifacts. She stood in front of the screen showing the extinct Drenkai. I was there when they died, she said quietly. It was the first time James had heard emotion in her voice. I was young. Fresh from the academy, I was so proud to be assigned to guide them. The Drenkai were brilliant. They learned everything we taught them. They became logical, efficient, perfect. She touched the screen gently. When the disaster came, a solar flare that would destroy their homeworld, we calculated they had 6 months to evacuate. It was possible. Difficult, but possible. I went to give them the plan we had developed. What happened? James asked softly. They had already calculated it themselves, down to the exact same numbers. But they had also calculated the cost, the resources needed, the strain on surrounding systems, the political complications, the probability of long-term survival, even if they evacuated. They ran every simulation, and in most of them they died anyway, just slower and with more suffering. Avetta turned to face him, and James saw something in her eyes he had not seen before. Pain. Deep, terrible pain. So they decided not to evacuate. They spent their last 6 months in peace. They wrote down their history, said goodbye to each other. And when the solar flare came, they faced it with calm acceptance. I watched their world burn from orbit. I listened to their final transmissions. They were not afraid. They were not angry. They had made the logical choice. That was not logic, James said. That was giving up. He called it wisdom, Shavira replied. Her voice cracked slightly. They thanked us for teaching them to see reality clearly. They said we had freed them from the burden of false hope, and then they died. All 3 billion of them. Gone. She walked to James and stood close enough that he could see his reflection in her golden eyes. Their last message haunts me, Commander. They said logic had taught them that death was inevitable, so fear was illogical, but they also said they wished they had been foolish enough to try anyway. They wished they had been more like the primitive species who fought against fate, even when fate was certain. They wished they had been more like humans, James said, understanding dawning. Yes, Shavira whispered. And I need to know if your refusal to accept reality is wisdom or madness. I need to know if hope is strength or delusion. Because if I am wrong again, if I recommend we leave humanity alone and you destroy yourselves or others, I will have failed twice. And I cannot bear that. James saw her then not as an alien princess or a judge deciding his species' fate, but as a person carrying impossible guilt. She was not testing humanity. She was testing herself. The next test will be personal, Commander, she said, stepping back. I need to know if human emotion is genuine or manipulation. I need to know if you can be trusted. What do you mean? James asked. Shavira looked away. Tomorrow, I will show you something I have never shown anyone outside my species. And your reaction will tell me everything I need to know about whether humanity deserves to be free." She left the room without another word. James stood alone, surrounded by artifacts from Earth, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. He had a feeling the real test was just beginning. Part 3. When walls come down, James was woken before dawn by a soft chime at his door. When he opened it, Shivera stood there alone without guards or attendants. She wore simple robes instead of her usual formal attire, and her scales looked duller somehow, as if she had not slept. "Come with me," she said without greeting. "There is something I need to show you." They walked through corridors James had not seen before. These passages were older looking. The walls were rough stone instead of smooth metal. The lighting was dimmer. They went down and down until James lost track of how deep into the station they had gone. Finally, they reached a massive door carved with symbols. Shivera placed her hand against it, and the door opened with a sound like a long-held breath being released. The chamber beyond took James' breath away. It was enormous. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet above them, disappearing into darkness. And filling the space from floor to ceiling were monuments. Thousands of them. Maybe tens of thousands. Each one was different. Some were tall spires. Others were simple stones. Some had writing. Some had images. All of them glowed with a soft blue light. "This is the Archive of Failures," Shivera said. Her voice echoed in the vast space. "Every species my people have tried to guide and failed to save has a memorial here. We keep them so we never forget the cost of our mistakes." James walked forward slowly. He approached the nearest monument. It showed a species that looked almost like insects, with forearms and compound eyes. The inscription was in Valkyrie, but somehow James understood it. The translation device in his ear was working overtime. The crystal, population 12 billion, extinct 470 years ago. They accepted our guidance. They built a civilization of perfect order. When a plague came, they calculated the most efficient response. They quarantined the sick and let them die to save resources. But the plague mutated. It spread anyway. In the end, they all died alone in their perfect, isolated units. We had taught them efficiency, but not compassion. We failed them. James felt sick. He moved to another monument, and another. Each one told the same type of story. Species that the Valkyrie had tried to help. Species that had learned logic and order. Species that had died anyway because they had forgotten something essential about survival. "There are 2,317 species in this archive," Shivera said. She walked among the monuments like a ghost. "Each one is a reminder of our failure. We thought we were helping. We thought logic and order were the path to survival. We were wrong so many times." She stopped in front of one monument that was larger than the others. The Drinkai. James recognized them from the images Shivera had shown him before. "This one is mine," she said quietly. "I was assigned to them. I guided them. I taught them. And I watched them choose death because they had learned their lessons too well. They had become more Valkyrie than we are. So logical they forgot how to fight. So wise they forgot how to hope." James stood beside her and looked at the memorial. "You blame yourself." "I was their teacher, their mentor. I gave them the tools that made them choose extinction." Shivera's voice was barely a whisper. "And now I am supposed to decide humanity's fate. What if I am wrong again? What if I recommend freedom and you destroy yourselves? What if I recommend quarantine and I kill your spirit the way I killed theirs?" James saw her shoulders shaking. He realized with shock that she was crying. The alien princess who had seemed so cold and controlled was breaking down in front of him without thinking. James reached out and placed his hand on her arm. Shivera flinched at the contact but did not pull away. "You did not kill them," James said firmly. "They made their own choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice, but it was theirs to make. You cannot carry the weight of every species in this room. It is too much for anyone." "I'm Valkyrie," Shivera said. Her voice was choked with emotion. "We do not break under weight. We calculate, we analyze, we find the logical solution." "You are not a calculator," James replied. "You are a person. And people are allowed to feel grief. They are allowed to doubt. That does not make you weak. It makes you alive. Shavera turned to look at him. Her golden eyes were wet with tears. Why are you comforting me? I am testing your species. I hold your fate in my hands. You should be manipulating me, using this moment of weakness to your advantage. That would be the logical thing to do. James smiled sadly. Maybe, but I am human. Right. We do not turn away from someone in pain just because it would be strategic. That would make me less human, not more. And if being human means losing this test, then I guess we lose. Something changed in Shavera's expression. The walls she had built around herself seemed to crack. She stared at James as if seeing him for the first time. I do not understand you, she whispered. Nothing you do makes sense. You should be afraid. You should be angry. You should hate me for putting your species on trial. But instead you offer comfort to your judge. Why? Because you need it, James said simply. Is that not reason enough? Shavera turned away from him. She walked to the center of the archive and looked up at the thousands of monuments surrounding them. When she spoke, her voice was stronger, but still carrying that edge of pain. I need to tell you the truth, Commander. The real reason you are here, Council is not debating trade agreements. They're debating whether to quarantine Earth. For the past year, we have been watching your species. We have seen your wars, your pollution, your conflicts, your chaos. Many on the Council believe you are too dangerous to be allowed to spread further into the galaxy. James felt cold dread settle in his stomach. And what do you believe? I do not know, Shavera admitted. That is why I brought you here. I have been documenting everything, every test, every conversation, every reaction. I am building a report for the Council. What I recommend will likely determine their decision. So this has all been theater, James said. He felt betrayed somehow, even though he had known this was a test from the beginning. You have been recording me like a specimen. Yes, Shavera said. She did not apologize. I needed to see the real you, not the diplomat, not the representative. The human underneath. I needed to know if your species' compassion is genuine or just a strategy. And what have you decided? James asked. He was surprised by how much her answer mattered to him. This had started as a mission, a job, but somewhere along the way, it had become personal. That is what terrifies me, Shavera said. She turned to face him again. I came into this believing I could be objective. I would observe, I would analyze. I would reach a logical conclusion. But you have made that impossible. How? Because I like you, she said. The words seemed to pain her. I enjoy our conversations. I find myself looking forward to seeing you each day. When you chose to comfort me instead of using my weakness, I felt something I have not felt since the Drenkai died. I felt hope, and that compromises everything. James took a step toward her. Why does it compromise anything? Because I cannot trust my own judgment now, Shavera replied. What if I recommend freedom for humanity not because it is right, but because I want it to be right? What if my feelings blind me the way they blinded me before? The Drenkai seemed worthy too, and I was wrong. I cannot be wrong again. The cost is too high. Maybe you were not wrong before, James said. Maybe the Drenkai were worthy. They just made a choice you would not have made. It does not mean they failed. It means they were free. They chose death. They chose what felt right to them in that moment. Maybe it was the wrong choice, but they had the right to make it. Freedom means the freedom to fail, Princess. If you only allow species to be free when you are certain they will succeed, then you are not really offering freedom at all. Shavera looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked past him, toward the door. Come, there's more I need to show you. They left the archive and walked back up through the station. But this time, Shavera took him to a different section. They entered a room filled with screens and recording equipment. James realized it was a monitoring station. This is where I have been compiling my report, Shavera said. She activated the screens, and James saw recordings of himself. Every test, every conversation, even private moments when he had thought he was alone, I have documented everything. The Council will see all of this. James felt exposed, vulnerable, but he pushed that feeling down. Show me what you plan to tell them. Shavera pulled up a document. It was written in Valkyrie, but the translation scrolled beside it. James read through it, and felt his heart sink. Every human strength was framed as a potential danger. Their emotion was called instability. Their hope was called delusion. Their refusal to accept losses was called reckless gambling. "This is what you think of us?" James asked. He could not keep the hurt from his voice. "This is what the council expects to hear," Shivera replied. "This is the evidence that supports quarantine. I gathered it because that is what I was supposed to do. But is it what you believe?" Shivera closed the document. She looked at James with those golden eyes that had seen so much death and failure. "I do not know what I believe anymore, Commander. You have confused everything. You have made me question not just humanity, but my entire civilization. What if we have been wrong? What if logic without emotion is not wisdom, but just another form of blindness?" "Then change your report," James said. "Tell them the truth. Tell them that humans are messy and emotional and illogical, but we survive anyway. Tell them that maybe surviving is not about being perfect. Maybe it is about caring enough to keep trying even when trying seems pointless." "If I do that, I risk everything," Shivera said. "My reputation, my position, my credibility. The council trusted me to be objective. If they think I have been compromised, they will dismiss everything I say." "Then I guess you have a choice to make," James replied. "You can be the logical Velkari princess who gives them what they expect. Or you can be the person who comforts someone in pain because that is what feels right. You cannot be both." Shivera looked at him, and James saw the war happening behind her eyes. Logic against feeling, duty against desire, safety against truth. "I need time to think," she said finally. "The council convenes tomorrow. I must present my findings then. Until that moment, I cannot tell you what I will say." "I understand," James said, though he did not really. His entire species' fate hung in the balance. All he could do was wait and hope that an alien princess would choose compassion over logic. Shivera walked him back to his quarters. At the door, she stopped and looked at him one more time. "Thank you, Commander," she said softly, "for treating me like a person instead of a judge, for seeing my pain instead of my power. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you have given me something precious. You have reminded me what it feels like to hope." She left before James could respond. He went inside and sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the walls. Tomorrow would decide everything. Tomorrow, the Velkari Council would determine if humanity lived free or died in isolation, and all James could do was hope that somewhere in that archive of failures, Princess Shivera had finally learned that logic alone was not enough to save anyone. Part 4. The Council's Judgment. The Council Chamber was the largest room James had ever seen. It was carved from a single piece of dark crystal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The ceiling was so high, it disappeared into shadow. Around the circular floor stood 17 massive thrones, each occupied by a Velkari elder. Their scales were darker than Shivera, almost black with age. Their eyes held the weight of centuries. James stood in the center of the circle, feeling very small and very human. Shivera stood beside one of the thrones. She had not looked at him since he had been brought in. Her face was a mask of perfect Velkari composure. All the emotion he had seen the day before was gone, or hidden so deep he could not find it. The eldest of the council spoke. His voice was like stones grinding together. "We convene to hear Princess Shivera report on the human species. The question before us is clear. Do we offer Earth partnership, or do we implement containment protocols? Princess, you have spent considerable time with Commander Chen. What have you learned?" Shivera stepped forward. A holographic display activated in the center of the circle. James saw himself on the screens. The tests. The conversations. Every moment documented and analyzed. "Honored Council," Shivera began. Her voice was steady and cold. "I have completed my evaluation of humanity as represented by Commander James Chen. What I have found is deeply troubling." James felt his heart sink. She had chosen logic over hope. He could not blame her. She had too much to lose. But it still hurt to hear. "Humans are driven by emotion rather than reason," Shivera continued. "They make decisions based on feelings that cannot be quantified. They refuse to accept mathematical realities. They gamble with lives and resources on outcomes that probability says are impossible. The screens showed clips of James during the rescue simulation. Every impossible choice he had made, every risk he had taken. In this scenario, Commander Chen was presented with a clear logical solution. Evacuate those who could be saved quickly. Seal the damaged section. Minimize loss. Instead, he chose to risk total failure attempting to save everyone. By any measure, this was foolish. One of the council members leaned forward, yet the simulation shows he succeeded, Shivera admitted. Against all probability. And this is precisely what concerns me. Humans do not respect probability. They see impossible odds and try anyway. This makes them unpredictable, dangerous. James wanted to speak, to defend himself and his species, but he had been ordered to remain silent. His only hope was that Shivera would remember their conversations, that some part of what he had said would matter. I have additional evidence, Shivera said. She brought up more recordings. James saw himself in the archive surrounded by monuments to the dead. He saw himself reaching out to comfort her. He saw the private moment when he had been vulnerable with her. Humans form emotional attachments quickly, Shivera explained. Commander Chen showed concern for my well-being, despite the fact that I held his species' fate in my hands. This could be seen as strategic manipulation, or it could be evidence of genuine but inappropriate emotional response. Either way, it demonstrates a lack of logical thinking. The council members nodded. They were eating this up. Every word Shivera spoke confirmed what they already believed. Humans were too emotional, too chaotic, too dangerous. Based on this evidence, Shivera said. She paused. James held his breath. I recommend quarantine. Humanity should be contained to their solar system until they evolve past their emotional handicaps. It is for their own good and the safety of the galaxy. The words hit James like a physical blow. It was over. Shivera had chosen safety over hope, logic over feeling. She had given the council exactly what they wanted to hear. Several council members began to speak at once, voicing their agreement. James felt numb. He had failed. His entire species would be locked away like criminals. All their dreams of exploring the stars would die here in this dark chamber. But then Shivera raised her hand. The council fell silent. However, she said quietly, I must also present an alternative interpretation of the same evidence. James' head snapped up. What was she doing? Everything I have told you is true, Shivera continued. But it is not the whole truth. Yes, humans are emotional. Yes, they refuse to accept probability. Yes, they form attachments quickly. But what if these are not weaknesses? What if they are strengths we simply do not understand? She waved her hand, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed the Drenkai, the extinct species that haunted her. 200 years ago, we mentored the Drenkai. We taught them everything we knew. They became logical, efficient, perfect. And when disaster came, they calculated their odds and chose death because probability said survival was unlikely. We call this wisdom. But was it? The council shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not what they had expected. Commander Chen faced similar impossible odds in my simulations. But unlike the Drenkai, he refused to accept defeat. He gambled everything on hope, and he won. Not because he was smarter or more advanced, but because he was too stubborn to quit. Shivera pulled up more recordings. James saw himself talking about hope, about refusing to give up, about caring enough to try. The Drenkai final message to us was that they wished they had been foolish enough to fight. They wished they had clung to hope, even when hope was illogical. They wished, and here Shivera's voice cracked slightly. They wished they had been more like humans. She turned to face the council directly. What if we have been wrong? What if survival is not about logic? What if the species that survive are not the smartest or most efficient, but the ones who refuse to give up even when giving up makes sense? Princess, one of the elders, interrupted. You are allowing emotion to cloud your judgment. This is exactly why we must be cautious with humanity. You have become attached to this human, and now you cannot think clearly. You are right, Shivera said. She looked at James for the first time since the hearing began. I have become attached. I like Commander Chen. I admire him. And yes, that compromises my objectivity. But perhaps objectivity is not what we need. Perhaps we need to admit that 2,317 species have died under our guidance because we taught them logic without teaching them hope. The chamber erupted in argument. Voices overlapped. Some council members agreed with Shivera's original assessment. Others were outraged by her change in position. The noise grew louder and louder, then suddenly alarms blared throughout the station. The holographic displays switched to emergency feeds. James saw explosions, structural damage. People running. What is happening? The eldest council member demanded. A Velkari technician voice came through the speakers. Station Omega in this system has suffered catastrophic failure. A cargo ship collided with the central hub. The structure is collapsing. We have over 5,000 personnel trapped inside. Life support is failing. Council fell silent. James saw calculations running behind their eyes. They were doing the math, determining what could be saved, what would be lost, making the logical choices. But they were not moving. They were frozen, paralyzed by the weight of their own logic. Just like the Drenkai had been. How long until total collapse? Shivera asked. 18 minutes, came the response. Maybe less. The damage is spreading. What is the logical rescue protocol? The eldest council member asked. Evacuate accessible sections. Seal compromised areas. We can save approximately 40% of those trapped. The rest, the technician voice hesitated. The rest cannot be reached in time. 40%. 3,000 lives lost. 2,000 saved. The math was clear, simple, logical, and everyone in the council chamber knew it was the right choice. But no one gave the order. James saw his chance. He stepped forward. Let me help. You are human, one council member said with disdain. What could you possibly offer? A really stupid plan, James replied. The kind of plan that ignores probability. The kind that tries to save everyone, even when everyone cannot be saved. The kind of plan that might just work because we are too stubborn to accept that it will not. The council members looked at each other. They were still calculating, still analyzing, still frozen. Shivera stepped down from her place beside the thrones. She walked to James' side. The council grants Commander Chen temporary command authority, she announced. Let us see if human emotion can succeed where Velkari logic cannot. Princess, you do not have the authority, an elder began. Then stop me, Shivera challenged. But do it quickly because we have 16 minutes left and every second. You spend debating as another second those people are dying, no one moved. They could not. Their logic prevented them from endorsing a plan that probability said would fail. But it also prevented them from stopping one that might succeed. James did not wait for official approval. He ran from the council chamber with Shivera beside him. They raced through corridors toward the command center. James' mind was already working. He needed layout data, engineering teams, resources, everything. Why are you helping me? James asked as they ran. You were about to recommend quarantine? Shivera admitted. Because I was afraid of being wrong again. Afraid of another memorial in the archive with my name on it. But then I realized something. The Drenkai did not fail because I gave them bad advice. They failed because I taught them to be afraid of failure. I taught them that making the wrong choice was worse than making no choice at all. And that is what killed them. They reached the command center. Screens showed the dying station. People trapped. Time running out. I will not make that mistake again, Shivera said. She looked at James with determination in her golden eyes. So show me, Commander. Show me what happens when humans refuse to accept the inevitable. Show the Council. Show the galaxy. Prove that hope is not delusion. Prove that caring more than it is logical to care is not weakness, but the greatest strength any species can have. James turned to the command console. He pulled up every system, every resource, every option. 16 minutes to save 5,000 lives. Impossible by any logical standard, but James Chen was human. And humans did not believe in impossible. He started giving orders, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard his own words echoing back to him. Hope is what makes us try when logic says to quit. It's time to see if that was enough, Hash. Part 5. The human answer. James stared at the screens showing Station Omega tearing itself apart. 16 minutes had already dropped to 15. 5,000 lives hung in the balance. The Velkari technicians around him were frozen, waiting for him to give the logical order. Evacuate who could be saved. Seal the rest. Accept the losses. But James had not come this far to accept losses. Give me control of all emergency channels, he ordered. I need to speak to everyone on that station. Velkari and human. The technicians hesitated. Shavira stepped forward. Do as he says. Now. The channel opened. James took a breath and spoke. This is Commander James Chen. I have command authority for this rescue. I know the situation looks bad. I know the numbers say we cannot save everyone. I know probability is against us. But I am human, and humans are really, really stupid about probability. He could hear confused voices coming back through the channel. People asking what he meant. People scared and desperate. Here is what we are going to do, James continued. His voice was steady, even though his hands were shaking. We are not evacuating the accessible sections first. We are going to the most damaged areas. The places where people are trapped with no way out. We are going to save the ones everyone else has already written off, because that is what humans do. We do not leave anyone behind. Commander, that is illogical, one of the Velkari technicians protested. You will waste resources on people who cannot be saved, while those with better chances die waiting. Or we will inspire everyone to fight harder, James shot back. Logic says to accept defeat. Humanity says to make defeat work for its life. Patch me through to all emergency teams. When the connection opened, James started giving orders that made no sense. He told engineering teams to shore up the most damaged sections instead of the stable ones. He redirected life support to areas that were already compromised. He sent rescue teams into zones that were mathematically certain to collapse. Every decision violated standard protocol. Every choice ignored probability. The Velkari around him looked at him like he had lost his mind. But Shavira stood beside him and did not question a single order. She trusted him. Or maybe she just wanted to believe that hope could be stronger than mathematics. Commander, a voice came through the channel. It was one of the rescue team leaders. I am at Section 12, as ordered. But the structure here is failing. We have maybe 3 minutes before total collapse. There are 40 people trapped behind a sealed bulkhead. We do not have time to cut through. James looked at the schematics. The rescue leader was right. 3 minutes was not enough time. Logic said to move on. Save people who could actually be reached. What do you have for cutting equipment? James asked. Standard plasma torch. But it would take 10 minutes to cut through that bulkhead. Then do not cut through it, James said. Blow it. Use emergency charges. Make a hole big enough for people to fit through. It could cause the entire section to collapse immediately, the rescue leader protested. It could, James agreed. Or it could work. Do you trust me? There was a long pause. Then the rescue leader laughed. It was a slightly hysterical sound. I am Velkari. We do not trust. We calculate. But my calculations say everyone here dies anyway, so why not try the stupid human way? That is the spirit, James said with a grin. Set the charges. For the next 12 minutes, James conducted the most chaotic rescue operation anyone had ever seen. Nothing went according to plan because there was no plan. There was just James making decisions on instinct and hope and sheer stubborn refusal to accept that anyone had to die. He rerouted power in ways that should have caused cascade failures. He ordered people to take routes that were marked as impassable. He told rescue teams to split up when standard protocol said to stay together. Every choice was wrong. Every decision was reckless, and somehow it was working. Section by section, people were pulled from the wreckage. The 40 people behind the bulkhead made it out seconds before that section collapsed. A group trapped in a sealed environmental pod was reached using a route that had been deemed too dangerous. Over and over, James gambled with lives and won, but time was running out. 3 minutes left, and there were still over 800 people unaccounted for. They were scattered across the station in pockets that had lost communication. No one knew exactly where they were, or if they were even still alive. "Commander, we must begin evacuating," a Valkyrie elder voice came through the command channel. "You have done well. You have saved more than probability said you would. But you cannot save everyone. It is time to accept reality." James looked at the screens. 800 people. 3 minutes. The elder was right. It was impossible. But James had not listened to impossible yet. He was not going to start now. "All rescue teams," he said. "Forget the mapped routes. Forget the structure scans. I need you to follow your instincts. Look for any signs of life. Follow sounds. Follow heat signatures. Follow your gut. Do not think. Just move." "That is insane," someone said. "Yes," James agreed. "It is. Do it anyway." What happened next would be studied for years afterward. Rescue teams stopped following logical search patterns and started moving on instinct. They found people in places the computers said no one could be. They heard sounds that sensors had missed. They took chances that should not have paid off, and they found people. Not all 800, but more than should have been possible. 500, 600, 700. 2 minutes left. 100 people still missing. "Commander, we are out of time," Shavira said quietly. She looked at him with something like awe in her golden eyes. "You have done the impossible. You must order evacuation now, or we will lose everyone, including the rescue teams." James knew she was right. He had pushed luck as far as it would go, maybe further. Staying any longer was not hope. It was suicide. But giving the order to leave meant accepting that 100 people would die. 100 lives that he had gambled with and lost. "All teams evacuate," he said. The words felt like broken glass in his throat. "You have 60 seconds. Get to the transport ships now." He watched the teams stream out of the dying station. They moved fast, carrying wounded and exhausted survivors. The ships detached and powered away from the wreckage. 50 seconds left. 40. 30. "Commander," a voice crackled through the static. It was one of the rescue team leaders. "We found them. The missing 100. They were in a shielded storage bay. The sensors could not penetrate the shielding, but we can see them now. They are alive." James' heart leaped. "Can you reach them?" "Negative. We are already evacuating. There is no time." 20 seconds. James looked at the screen, showing the location of the survivors. They were on the opposite side of the station from the evacuation point. No ship could reach them and get clear in 20 seconds. It was impossible, unless... "How structurally sound is the storage bay?" James asked. "Very," came the response. "It is designed to survive impacts." "Why?" "Because we are not going to rescue them," James said. "We are going to take them with us." "Shavira, I need you to calculate something for me. If we detonate charges to separate that storage bay from the station, can it survive as an independent unit long enough for a ship to retrieve it?" Shavira's eyes went wide. She started working the numbers at inhuman speed. "Possibly. The bay has emergency seals. Its own life support. It could survive in theory, but separating it from the station would accelerate the main structure collapse. The station would break apart immediately. But the bay would survive? For approximately 90 seconds, then its systems would fail. And can a ship reach it in 90 seconds? Shavira hesitated. Then she smiled. It was the first real smile James had seen from her. If the pilot is willing to fly like a human instead of a Valkyrie, then yes, it can be done. "Do it," James ordered. "Detonate separation charges on the storage bay. All ships move to safe distance, except for one. I need a volunteer pilot." "I will go," Shavira said. "Princess, you cannot," one of the council members protested through the channel. "It is too dangerous. Commander Chen has made 50 dangerous choices in the last 15 minutes, and they have all worked," Shavira replied. "I think it is time I learned to be a little more stupid, a little more human." She ran from the command center. James tracked her on the screens. She reached a transport ship and took control. The other ships moved back as massive charges detonated around the storage bay. The station came apart like a flower blooming in reverse. Sections peeled away, spinning into the void. The storage bay broke free, tumbling through space with 100 people inside who had no idea they had just been turned into a makeshift. Lifeboat Shivera ship accelerated toward the tumbling bay. She was flying like nothing James had ever seen. Not smooth and calculated, but wild and instinctive. She dodged debris that the computers said she could not avoid. She pulled maneuvers that gravity said were impossible, and she reached the bay with 10 seconds to spare. Magnetic clamps locked on. Shivera's ship engines screamed as she pulled away from the dying station, dragging the storage bay behind her. 5 seconds. 4, 3. Station Omega exploded. The shockwave caught Shivera's ship and sent it spinning. For a horrible moment, James thought she would lose control. Thought the storage bay would break free. Thought 100 people would die after all, but Shivera fought the spin. She burned every thruster she had. She held on to that bay with pure determination and refused to let go. And then she was clear. The ship stabilized. The bay was intact. 100 people were alive. 5,000 people had been on Station Omega when disaster struck. The logical rescue plan would have saved 2,000. Maybe 2,500 if they were lucky. James had saved 40. 973. The command center erupted in chaos. Valkyrie technicians were staring at the numbers, unable to believe them. It should not have been possible. Probability said it could not happen, but it had happened because a human had ignored probability and an alien princess had learned to hope. James collapsed into a chair. His entire body was shaking with exhaustion and relief. He had done it. Against all odds, he had actually done it. Shivera returned to the command center an hour later. She walked straight to James, and without saying a word, she hugged him. It was awkward. Valkyrie were not built for hugging, but she held on tight and James could feel her trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, "for showing me what it means to fight, for teaching me that hope is not delusion, for proving that caring more than it is logical to care is the only thing that matters." She pulled back and looked at him. Her golden eyes were bright. "The council is reconvening. I must give my final recommendation. And I know what I'm going to say." They returned to the council chamber together. The elders sat in their thrones, looking shaken. They had watched the entire rescue operation. They had seen the impossible become real. The eldest council member spoke. His voice had lost some of its certainty. "Princess Shivera, you have witnessed remarkable events today. What is your recommendation regarding humanity?" Shivera stood tall. "Honored Council, I withdraw my recommendation for quarantine. Instead, I recommend immediate partnership with Earth, not because humans are perfect, not because they are logical, but because they have something we desperately need. They have hope. They have the courage to try when trying seems pointless. They refuse to accept defeat even when defeat is mathematically certain." She gestured to the screens still showing the rescued survivors. "Commander Chen saved almost 5,000 lives today because he refused to do the logical thing. He gambled everything on a series of impossible choices. And he won. Not once, but dozens of times. This is not luck. This is not anomaly. This is who humans are. They are reckless," one elder said. But the protest sounded weak. Shivera agreed. "Beautifully, recklessly, gloriously reckless. And that recklessness saved lives that we would have written off as acceptable losses. How many species in our archive died because we taught them to accept the inevitable? How many could have survived if we had taught them to fight instead?" She turned to look at the thrones. "We call ourselves wise. We call ourselves advanced. But we have forgotten something essential. Survival is not about logic. It is about refusing to give up. It is about caring enough to try. It is about hope." The council was silent. James could see them struggling with centuries of belief. Logic and order had been their foundation. Shivera was asking them to question everything. Finally, the eldest spoke. "What you propose is unprecedented. To partner with a species so young, so chaotic, so emotional? What I propose is survival, Shavira replied. The galaxy is changing. New threats are emerging. Old certainties are crumbling. We cannot face what is coming with logic alone. We need allies who will fight beside us, who will refuse to accept defeat, who will care more than it is logical to care. We need humans. Another long silence. Then the eldest council member spoke. Very well. The council accepts your recommendation. Earth will be offered partnership. But there is one condition. James felt his breath catch. There was always a condition. Princess Shavira, you will serve as permanent liaison to humanity. You will live on Earth. You will continue to study them. And you will report back to us on whether this partnership is working. Do you accept this responsibility? Shavira looked at James. He saw something in her eyes. Relief, maybe, or excitement. Or maybe just hope that she had found something worth believing in. I accept, she said. The hearing ended. Treaties would be drawn up. Details would be negotiated. But the decision was made. Humanity would not be quarantined. They would be free to explore the stars and share their particular brand of beautiful, reckless hope with the galaxy. James and Shavira walked out of the council chamber together. They did not speak until they reached a viewport overlooking the stars. So you are coming to Earth, James said finally. How do you feel about that? Terrified, Shavira admitted. Excited. Hopeful. So many emotions, I barely know how to process them all. Is this what being human feels like? Pretty much, James said with a smile. Welcome to the chaos. I have one question, Shavira said. She looked at him seriously. When you were conducting the rescue, when you were making all those impossible choices, did you actually believe you could save everyone? Or were you just pretending? James thought about that. Honestly, I do not know. Part of me knew the odds, knew how unlikely it was. But another part of me refused to accept that. That part just kept trying because the alternative was giving up. And giving up meant people died. So you chose hope over reality. No, James corrected gently. I chose to make hope into reality. That is the difference. The Drenkai saw hope as a denial of mathematics. But hope is not about ignoring reality. It is about refusing to let reality be the end of the story. It is about fighting to change the outcome, even when the outcome seems fixed. Shavira smiled. You are going to be insufferable on Earth, are you not? Teaching everyone this human philosophy. Probably, James agreed. But you are going to love it, because that is what humans do. We make you believe in impossible things, and then we make those impossible things real. She laughed. It was a light, musical sound that James had never heard from her before. It was the sound of hope finally finding a voice. I think the council made the right choice, she said. Not because humans are perfect, but because the galaxy needs people who are stubborn enough to refuse when the universe says no. People who care more than they should. People who fight harder than makes sense. People like you, James said. You flew that rescue ship like a human today. You made impossible choices. You refused to give up. I learned from the best, Shavira replied. She looked out at the stars. This mission was supposed to be simple. A diplomatic negotiation. Gather data. Make recommendations. But you made it personal, Commander. You showed me that logic without heart is just slow death. And now, I cannot go back to who I was before. Is that a bad thing? James asked. No, Shavira said. She turned to him with those golden eyes full of warmth and hope, and something that looked suspiciously like friendship. It is the best thing that could have happened. Because you did not just save 5,000 lives today, Commander Chen. You saved mine, too. They stood together at the viewport and watched the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was waiting. A chaotic, emotional, reckless world full of humans who refused to accept the impossible. And now they would have an ally, a friend. Someone who had learned that hope was not weakness, but the greatest strength any being could possess. James thought this was a diplomatic mission. But Shavira had been right. It had become personal. Not in the way she had planned. Not as a test or evaluation. but as a genuine connection between two beings from different worlds, who had learned to see past logic to the truth underneath survival. Was not about being perfect. It was about caring enough to keep trying. It was about refusing to give up on anyone. It was about hope, and that was the most human answer of all.